You're referring to the MUD or the Minnesota Watershed?
Yeah, well,
That's next
they,
week. And
yeah,
it's,
they want us to go down there to say yes or no or something.
yeah, to participate
I
in
was
the
trying to
event.
figure out where the event
Our
was.
bias is going to be
That same old hotel they had in Doubletree downtown.
let's
Or
talk
No,
about
it was
they
a
moved.
different one.
Probably
Sounds
did.
good.
Let me see if I
Yeah,
can find
and
it.
no if you want to set up a time, invite you and I, we can do a Zoom.
I know they're just
Thursday, Friday.
I just,
Yeah,
I wasn't sure
that's
too, because I
I don't know. I'll
haven't
look.
had really much
So far, it seems, but
So
yeah, I'm nervous about it.
the tab run, does the meter run?
Just because you know, I don't know
Networking
if
event
they
on the
took
So, I
15th
mean,
from
precautions.
6 to
again, I'm
8
You
assuming
know,
this
did
is
they
new.
is
break
in
any of the?
Radisson Hotel. It's called the Capitol
It
Ridge.
looks okay.
I can give you the address if
Yeah.
you like.
Well, he's
yeah,
working
yeah.
already.
What's the address?
So,
Okay, let's see what it does.
Yeah, we could definitely
St. Paul. So it's
set up. Wednesdays are
161
typically not
St.
terrible
It's
for
in
me,
my
but
Anthony
today I
Avenue.
have to be
upstairs
in
and I
like
can
4
hear
places at one time.
like the downspout just
You got
blow.
devils in
So I mean, if
Okay,
you just
good.
shoot me some
And that
dates,
is
in
typically
St.
pretty
Paul.
decent
yep, in St.
for
Paul.
me. I don't know, because we
Yep.
don't meet again. Well,
I
I'm not
think it's
here
on the
because
north
I'm gonna
side
be
of
on
94.
vacation. But yeah, typically I can
So I
just
see the contract in there with the
So
conservation
it's just
district.
today to hang out
I
at
assume that
my office,
they'll be able to use them anywhere you want, or is it because it didn't seem to be specific to just Washington County, or is there something? You know, I realize it's taking Catherine's positions, but and that's
Yeah,
fine. I'm not complaining
doing
about
this
it. I'm just saying it was
I don't
curious
like that these are
clarity. I,
yeah. They would completely work for Washington County or wherever
wow.
they needed inspection service.
and who?
Oops.
It's crazy that they keep them on. Usually you can shut it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a little legislative packet I gave one to the other managers.
Okay.
Just in advance of next week's, or I think the most important part is the
Wait
maps
for
that
Nick
show
to sit
where the
down.
elected officials
Yeah.
exist.
Okay.
So,
Perfect. Thank
just
you.
information.
More paper. Got it.
Yeah.
Good morning. Hello. Good morning. I'm gonna need a Rice Creek Watershed file cabinet for my house.
Of
Can I
course.
expense that?
All right, we begin the Rice Creek Watershed District Board of Managers meeting for Wednesday, February 8th, 2023. Managers are all present and accounted for, except for President Bradley, who gave previous notice, and Treasurer Wagaman, who also gave previous notice of their absence. So we have to set the agenda. Do we have any additions or deletions for the agenda this morning from the managers? All right, how about from the administrator?
Yes. Manager Waller, no, staff do not have any proposed changes.
All right, I'd like to add an item under actions, and that is the repeal of 2009-04, and that was the Rice Creek Watershed District resolution number. It has to do with the budget issue, and it's something I talked about at the workshop, and it removes the expenditures for contracts by the administrator and the president. And I'd like to make that item number 4, and make number 4 number 5, and number 5 number 6.
Mr. Chair, do we have information about that?
As we talked about this at the 9th, and if you remember at the last meeting, I asked the president what we were going to do about this at this meeting. He says, that's up to you. So we should have take a look at it. It happens to fit in, I believe, with the amendment to the bylaws issues. So.
Okay, well, I move approval of the agenda as amended.
I'll second that.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. The approval of the minutes for January 25th, 2023 regular meeting.
I'll move approval of the minutes.
I'll second that.
All in favor of the minutes for January 25th, 2023 regular meeting? Signal by saying aye, aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? None. Okay, and that brings us to the consent agenda for permit number 22118, Centennial Schools in Lana Lakes wants to do something with their tennis court. You have a motion for that?
I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Didn't seem to be any discussion to that, so. And now we have to move on to a public hearing. We're having a public hearing today for the stormwater management grant request from the cities Birchwood and New Brighton. And bear with me while I read this script. The regular board meeting is now recessed and the public hearing is open on the Rice Creek Watershed District's proposed selection of projects for funding through the district's storm water management grant program. In accordance with state law, notice of this hearing was published for 2 consecutive weeks in the St. Paul Pioneer Press and mailed to all cities within the Watershed District, as well as the district's 4 counties. I ask that those of you in attendance remotely mute your microphones until it is your turn to speak. The purpose of this hearing is to receive comments from the public on the projects that the board is considering for cost share assistance in the cities of Birchwood Village and New Brighton. Before the Watershed District can provide funds for capital work of these applicants, the state law requires the Board of Managers hold a public hearing, receive public comments, and make a judgment that each selected project is sound and cost-effective project to help fulfill our water resource goals. First, I will ask Catherine Nestor, District Water Monitoring Technician, to give a brief presentation of the proposed projects. When her remarks are completed, the floor will be open to any members of the public who wish to address the board. For those of you joining us in person, please come forward to the podium. For those of you who are joining us remotely, please ask to be recognized and address the board when I recognize you. Speak clearly and state your name and address for the record. If you have a written copy of your statement or any other documents you'd like to submit, please inform the board and the staff will provide direction on how to submit the materials for the record. During public comment, managers are welcome to ask questions of the commenters to clarify their remarks. I also may ask Ms. Nestor or representatives of the project's applicants to respond to any technical questions raised. Managers will hold their own comments on the projects until public hearing is closed. At that time, the board will have an opportunity to discuss the projects. Board action on selected projects for funding is tentatively scheduled for February 22nd, 2023's regular meeting. Catherine, would you please proceed?
Thank you, Manager Waller. I'm going to pause here for a second. I think we might have lost the Zoom feed.
Oh, drat. We did have someone on the Zoom feed.
We did. And I want to see if I can get it going again. We could try to get it going again.
Restart the computer, or because it's not, the computer is not on the Zoom meeting, so anyone who's attending isn't able to hear it.
I think it might be worth a shot to try to get back in. I don't know how to sign in and
We're having some technical difficulties here, and we're going to try to amend the difficulties. Is that what you intend to do at the moment? So do you want us to just wait, or shall we proceed? I need some guidance, gentlemen.
Manager Waller, I would suggest we make the attempt to reconnect the Zoom, the people who are online. We did have an individual that wanted to participate. I think it's reasonable for us to take that effort. Hopefully it won't take too long to do so. So maybe we just take a brief break here as they do their work.
So we'll just pause.
Coffee break.
Coffee break, yep.
Ah, there he is.
Yeah.
What's his, Ryan something was his name?
Right. Yeah, my name is Ryan Hankins. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I hear you loud and clear, and I see you too.
Well, as soon as you start doing this. we can turn it
And I live at 183 Wildwood Avenue in Birchwood. I'm just here to speak I'm a member of the Birchwood City Council. I'm just here to speak briefly on behalf of the
There it goes.
Yep. Just killed again.
station that's right outside my front door, just about. And we've had a lot of maintenance issues. We had a major disruption, and I think that's described well in the application. This is a lift station that's very close to the lake, and I think some repairs there and eliminating some of the emergencies that happen would reduce some of the risk to White Bear Lake right nearby. Thank you.
Well, we're Mr. Ryan. Please stand by, and when Catherine is finished with her presentation, we'll be glad to have your comment and have it on the record then.
I'm sorry. I hope I'm not out of turn. I just lost.
No, you're not out of turn. We're in a pause trying to get you back in turn. That's the whole deal here. But now that you're back up and running, I reckon we can begin. Catherine, would you please proceed?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the program to get.
Oh, the other part of the technology doesn't work now. Okay.
Oh, okay. This is not working very well, but we're gonna keep trying.
I don't know why.
Here we go.
Maybe?
All right, brief outline of the presentation. I'm going to go over the Stormwater Management Grant Program goals. I'm going to review the program guidelines, provide some summaries of the applications, and try to get signed into Zoom again. Sorry, 1 second.
We're going to try to put it on Patrick's computer, the presentation, and see if that helps.
Okay.
Because it's crashing the computer, the Shoreview computer. So Chris?
Yeah.
You have your computer? Yeah, you want to put it on? Just an idea. Hopefully that'll work.
Sorry, Ryan. Thank you for your patience as we want to make sure that you're present for the presentation.
Oh, I think it's good. And then if I
Okay, it looks good. So I'll just I'll just do the next slide.
Do it quick.
Okay,
We can
great.
just
All right, Ryan says it's good. Okay, we're good. Thank you. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, I already did this slide, so we can kind of move on. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is our next steps after the hearing today. Next slide. Okay, stormwater management program goals. Encourage local government units and others within the district to explore stormwater quality and quantity retrofit opportunities and incorporate those opportunities into development and infrastructure projects. Also to foster closer collaboration between partners and the district for stormwater quality and quantity improvement efforts. Foster stormwater management innovation and create demonstration and education examples, and defray local costs in the broader watershed-wide interests of improving water quality and decreasing flood damage risk. Next slide. The grant program guidelines, the applications were due December 22nd, 2022. A total of $300,000 is available for project cost sharing in 2023. Typically, not to exceed $100,000 per project. There is an exception for stormwater reuse irrigation projects, but there were no reuse applications for 2023. And 50% in applicant match funding is required. This year, we received 2 eligible applications requesting a total of $108,283. This is a map showing the locations of the 2 eligible grant applications, one in New Brighton and one in Birchwood Village. The first application, City of Birchwood Village Wildwood Lift Station Replacement. The project concept is to replace a failing sanitary sewer lift station that is approximately 250 feet away from White Bear Lake to significantly limit the future risk of excess nutrients and other pollution entering White Bear Lake due to lift station failure. The target water body is White Bear Lake. The total project cost is $750,000. The cost share request is $100,000. The water quality benefits include limiting the risk of future pollution due to lift station failure, and there are no flood control benefits. This is a map showing the location of the lift station in Birchwood Village at near the intersection of Wildwood Avenue and Owl Street. Second application is the City of New Brighton Storm Grant 2023. Project concept is to replace a standard storm sewer catch basin with a SAFL baffle and sumped catch basin at the outflow to Long Lake and Rice Creek to reduce the amount of fine sediments and harmful chemicals that cling to the surface area of the sediment. The target water bodies are Long Lake and Rice Creek. The total project cost is $16,566. Cost share request is $8,283. The water quality benefit is up to a 55% total suspended solid reduction in downstream water bodies. From the SAFL baffle, and no flood control benefits for this project. This is a map showing the location of the catch basin in New Brighton on a cul-de-sac there outlined in red. Okay, the next steps after this hearing is at the February 22nd, 2023 meeting. It's scheduled for the board to take action on the applications. They will consider and discuss staff, CAC, and engineer reviews and approve a resolution ordering selected projects under the related statute. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank
So
you,
if anyone has
Catherine.
any comments or questions?
Anyone on the board have any comments or questions? Staff? Okay, Mr. Ryan, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. I live at 183 Wildwood Avenue in Birchwood, right next to the lift station just about. And I'm also a member of the Birchwood City Council. I want to just speak in favor of this. This is there's a pretty close downhill slope from that lift station to the lake, and I think this reduces our risk of sort of those chemicals and pollutants flowing into the lake from a lift station that's kind of on its last legs here. So appreciate your support of this project. Thank you.
Is there anyone else out in the public that wishes to talk, speak to this matter, or the other one? Nobody? Okay. Well, and Board of Managers, do you have any comments?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to see that there are federal dollars going into this at a considerable sum. I would imagine this has come from the new Infrastructure Act, or what is the source of those dollars? Does anyone know?
I believe it's the new Infrastructure Act, but
The Inflation Reduction Act?
we had a meeting with the Congresswoman that day and the mayor, and I don't remember exactly where they said the money was coming from, but it's for federal dollars. It's the biggest part of the check.
Excellent.
And it's an excellent example of the district working with the city in partnership and with the federal government in order to accomplish a water quality program. In my opinion, that's just as we had the pleasure of being invited the day that the Congresswoman came to make the presentation, and both Administrator Tomzak and our manager Kyle Axtall were there, and we want to thank Kyle very much. Please reach out to him. He's left us, but before he left, he finished this chore, and so that's very important. We're still reaping the benefits of his work.
Well, congratulations to the city of Birchwood. This is Birchwood Village. Yep.
So with that, if there's no other discussion, I'll close this public hearing, and we'll move on to open mic. Hearing's closed. Now, anyone in the audience that wishes to chat today with us? How about out in video land? No one at all. So seeing there's no one here for public open mic comment, we'll move on to items for action. Item number 1 is the designation of the official depository and official newspaper. Administrator Tomzak, it's your turn to chat.
Yes, thank you, Manager Waller. Board of Managers, annually, your bylaws do require that you designate the official depository for the district as well as the official newspaper for publications. Staff is proposing no change from the current entities. The current official depository is PMA Financial Network, LLC, which is administering the 4M fund with U.S. Bank as the financial institution. And the district's official newspaper is the St. Paul Pioneer Press. You will see a motion at the bottom of page 48 in your packet.
Mr. Chair, I move to designate PMA Financial Network, LLC, administering the 4M funds with U.S. Bank as the financial institution and as the official depository of the Rice Creek Watershed District, and the St. Paul Pioneer Press is the official newspaper of the Rice Creek Watershed District.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? I would just mention that we do publish any of our notices in the local newspapers in addition to the official newspaper. So if you have an issue that's in Blaine or in Fridley or something, we'll be also notifying them, even though they're not, quote, the official newspapers. It has been our habit to make sure the public is informed on a wide dispersion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. No nays. So we'll move on to item number 2, the Washington Conservation District Inspection Service Agreement Amendment. And Mr. T, you're up, Terrence.
Good morning, Board of Managers. Today before you is amendment to our agreement with the Washington Conservation District. We entered into agreement with them in last September for inspection services, and we're looking to continue that. That current agreement is set to expire on February 28th of this year, so we are looking to extend that agreement through the rest of 2023.
All right. And this will be Washington. We've had this agreement before, and we're going to continue it.
Correct.
And they basically are going to operate in Washington County, then I assume.
Correct. Yep. And I believe we did have an agreement with them years past, and then we entered into a new agreement last year for some assistance.
Okay.
We've had some very good work from them. We have a large study that was done in the southeast portion of White Bear Lake that we're still working our way through implementing. So is there a motion for this?
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
Well, I would second it, and perhaps you want to read the motion into the,
Do we need to read it as a matter of official?
I would say so.
Fancy
in that
business?
it-
Okay.
yeah,
I'm not
it
accustomed to that, but
identifies the
Yep.
happy to play
signature.
along. All right, I propose we move the motion authorizing the administrator to amend the Washington Conservation District Inspection Service Agreement for additional aggregate spending authority not to exceed $40,500.
I second that.
Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No nays, so we'll move on.
Before Terrence leaves, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
How are things, Matt? I'd like to ask you how things are going with the, do we have a contract with Ramsey County
We do.
still?
Yep.
And
Things are going well. Their contract is also set to expire at the end of this year, so both contracts will be ending coming into 2024. So at that time or prior to that, I'm sure we will have some discussions about how to proceed.
And we have one with Anoka County also?
We do not have
No.
one with Anoka County.
Okay.
Nope.
Well, let me clarify a little bit here. I'll let, Terrence is talking about inspection contracts.
Right.
We have another contract with the Norfolk County Conservation District, and we have the same type of contract with Ramsey County Park System now because they don't have a conservation district in Washington County. So I'll let Nick detail it here.
Manager Waller, Board of Managers, that is correct. The district has multiple contracts with these conservation districts. Terrence's work here is referring to the inspection services that interface with our regulatory program. It's a efficient way for the district to manage staffing issues at the district, the ebbs and flows of the economy and that sort of thing. By having these contracts. The other contracts, the one that immediately comes to mind is for our implementation of the water quality grants that the CAC sees, and this is where they provide technical assistance in developing those plans for the various citizen sites and such.
But to clarify on the inspection, we have staff of our own that are designated to regions within the watershed, and that we use the expertise of the Ramsey County Parks
yes.
Department and the Washington County Conservation District as needed.
Yes.
So a great way to supplement our own staffing and get the inspections completed, so.
Yes.
And Manager Ryan, I would also note that we do have a map that we constantly update if there are staffing changes, either internally or with those different contracted inspectors.
Great.
And that gets posted to the website, so it's always been kept up to date if there is a change.
Yes. And they work in concert with the cities, and you're busy these days, so.
Correct. Yep.
Yes.
We routinely meet with them and have a really good working relationship with them, and they always come to us with questions and vice versa. And then yes, we do encourage them to make sure that they are always including cities whenever they're doing inspections, similar to how we operate.
So as I recall, when I first came on the board, staff did a series of presentations to the board about what they're doing and who's doing what they're doing and who's doing it. It might be time to revise those again.
Have a review again?
Right, and see where we're at on such things. Because I know since then, we've had COVID, we've had increased applications for contracts and inspections and permits, et cetera. So getting a general update would be terrific.
Manager Waller.
Yes, sir.
Board of Managers, I'm happy to advance with staff introductions to the board. We have a number of positions currently open that we're looking to fill, and then we'll, lack of better words, sprinkle those in amongst your other business to keep our agendas balanced.
Great,
So,
thank you.
If that concludes the discussion, thank you, Terrence. We'll move on to item number 3, which is the 2022 financial report for Metro Shooting / Trost Settlement Properties. Administrator Nick, you're up.
yes. Manager Waller, Board of Managers, this is the district's annual review for its financial reports. The circumstance for inclusion of the Metro Shooting and Trost settlements and that potential liability that exists there. We completed annually, as I said. That's in conjunction with your audit to disclose this in those materials. My understanding is you had a discussion about this at the recent workshop on this previous Monday. We made note, or I believe you were informed at that time, and I'll say again here that we know that the property has had some inquiries for potential development. We've seen this in previous years as well, yet there are significant uncertainties that remain in regards to the district's liability and what that would look like. So for purposes of this matter and the financial audit, it would seem the board would likely consider the second option on page 62 of your packet about the liability being remote and not seeing a significant change. This is the same option that you've exercised in previous years.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, do you have any comments on this morning or anything to add?
No, Mr. Chair, managers, I think our look at this continues. Mr. Tomczyk referred to ongoing discussions, and we'll certainly keep abreast of those. But for purposes of the audit and the audit opinion, I think we remain in the same posture.
Do we have a motion for to choose an option here, please?
I'll move it to open the discussion.
You have to choose an option. Which one we're going to use? Number 2, where it says the Board of Managers finds the triggering of potential contingent future liability to be remote, but nonetheless concludes that it should be referenced in the 2022 financial report as follows. And
I'm not particularly a fan of option 2 because I think the liability is not as remote as indicated in here, but I stated that in the workshop. So I mean, whatever option you guys choose.
I'm just asking you which one for discussion you're opening.
Well, I mean, I would open it to option number 3 because I think
Okay.
the liability is not as remote as indicated. Just having, you know, probably a little additional context coming from the city's perspective and the property owner perspective. The dialogue stated in here is, I'm going to use the wrong adjective, a skosh understated, just because, I mean, we've seen actual site plans. There were actual purchase agreements on this property. And as I indicated in the workshop, I think this is a little bit of a chicken versus the egg sort of situation as to what's going to, you know, what happens first, you know, until the contiguous, you know, acres via the, you know, settlement are identified. It really precludes moving forward with development. The purchase agreement that existed under the concept that there were 100 contiguous acres, but the purchaser at the time indicated that their third party could only find 66 or so acres. So again, one is precluding the other, but I think the liability as noted in here is probably not as remote as indicated in option 1 and 2, which is why I would favor option 3. But again, I know I'm in the minority here and that's okay. So whatever you guys decide to do, that's what you're going to do. But, you know, again, as dialogued in workshop, I don't think the the development is as remote as indicated, the development potential.
All right. And
For, pardon me,
we
Manager
need a
Wall.
second here to start.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
what I'm going to get to here.
That's
So
appreciated.
I'm going to second this motion for the discussion period
Sure.
purposes.
Yeah.
All right. So do you have any comments? Manager Wynant? No? Okay. Then I'll talk here a little bit. So I'm the person who started this,
Yep.
as Louis will remember, and I'm sure he's grateful for that because he gets billable hours every year since. The issue I had was that this was not in the annual report as at least a note. And it hadn't been in the annual report when it was first signed, which none of us on the board that are here today, or even in the system, I think Louis is the only one here who was privy or participated in the original contract negotiation here, if I'm correct. Is that correct, Louis? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, we were legal counsel for the district
at the time this settlement was made.
But the settlement was negotiated by the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust Council.
Oh, okay.
And
Well,
I want you to be aware of that.
Nevertheless, you're the only ones who are around when that deal was done, except for Teresa. So the board of managers at the time, I was in the minority, did not want to put this in the annual report. I felt it was something that should be in the annual report because one, it's a liability, and two, it also tells people who are property owners that there are possibilities that their justice could be provided for them. You know, it's a notice, a way to notice it. So that we've had this vote ever since every year, and we choose number 2 because the staff and determined that, and the legal counsel, and correct me if I'm wrong here, gentlemen, but determined that the process needed to have an actual permit submitted in order for it to move from being remote to something that was imminent. Since no permit application has been made, even though there's been discussions, that's why they've chosen number 2. When an actual permit comes to the district, as I understand it, that would change the process procedure, and we'd begin to move on to having to notify it as an actual, the next step of making it more like number 3 would be kicked in instead of number 2. So I think I summarized this. Am I correct here, gentlemen, or you had anything to add about it, or?
I think we both do.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then go ahead. We'll start with the administrator.
Thank you. Manager Waller, Board of Managers, a general response here would be, while the district and the settlements refer to the 100 acres of contiguous developable land, there are other portions of the regulations that would be applicable to the property and its development. And so that's where the valuable starting point is the application, where some of those other matters can then be sorted through. So that it's not to say that only the essence of the wetland mitigation is at hand, and only the applicant or the landowner in proposing a development can decide or begin to determine and ask questions as to which of those they feel is most cost-effective and viable in their development of the property, right? We need to, so to support a building, there may be soil correction, it may be in floodplain, it may be indeed wetland as well, but the complexity of all those issues combined is what the district, in a general opinion, needs to begin the conversation. And we do have those. When this recent proposed development came forth, the district staff were engaged in those discussions. And the reason that the potential developer left or decided to go isn't disclosed to us.
Mr. Smith, your turn.
Chair, I think Mr. Tomczyk has stated, I have nothing to add.
You have nothing to add. All right. So that's kind of where it's at. Why it gets to be number two, I've never been very happy about number two either, but until somebody comes in with an actual application and lays down the check, that's what the barrier is to going to number three. So,
Mr. Chair, if I might
yes.
comment, thank you. Okay, so I appreciate the commentary. I think part of the problem is it's the uncertainty of the contiguous wetlands that is driving the fact that a trigger hasn't been pulled on a permit. And that was the main factor in the last purchase agreement not being completed, was this notion that the watershed, and I'm not picking on anybody, was going to be that roadblock. When we dialogued in workshop, I had just asked what the price tag was on a potential, the liability of the watershed should something move forward. And I mean, a number was thrown out there, so it's not like it's unknown what that liability may be, maybe not to the exact penny. The problem is anyone that approaches the property owner or you guys pre-permit, I mean, the elephant in the room isn't soil correction and the other entities listed in the settlement. It's the contiguous uplands. That's the elephant in the room. It's not the other things. Anyone that's developed in Anoka County or anywhere within the watershed knows there's always going to be soil correction, erosion methods, and all those things exist in any permit. So I think again, the elephant in the room is the contiguous uplands. Again, that chicken and the egg situation. This is not metaphorically a hill that I'm going to die on or a sword that I'm going to fall on, but for the sake of transparency, since seemed to be, when I asked what the dollar amount was, there was some knowledge about that dollar amount. An amount was thrown out there. So it would seem to me that the liability amount or the liability to the watershed is known. Therefore, in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion, it should be on your audit. But again, I'm in the minority here and I am fine with that. I'm not trying to roll my sleeves up and fight somebody or fall on that sword. I just wanted to, maybe just give a different perspective. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Manager Wynant? So the only difference here would be is that if, as the motion is made, the motion was passed, is that it'd be now, there would be a note in the audit about the possible liability. It wouldn't necessarily be a number that would be thrown out because the numbers that are many years old now.
Yep.
And it would just be a note.
I understand.
And I think that that's not an unreasonable thing. That's what I wanted many years ago. I haven't changed it. So I could understand passing number 3 instead of number 2, in my point. So if there's any more discussion, we'll have a vote. All those in favor of the motion, which is for option number 3, signal by saying aye.
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 We just put it in as a note then. No nays, and we'll move on. Now, let's see, what's the next item? Hold on here. Yes, I offered number 4, which was the repeal of Resolution 2009-04.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
As the treasurer, I would just state that I will keep an eye on this one and note that it's in the, I will, what will I do? I make myself much more aware of this particular issue and follow it as need be.
If you're dying to speak here, Mr. Administrator, there isn't even a motion on the floor yet. But
Manager Waller, I certainly won't be voting on any motion, but I would like to respond in regards to Manager Wynant's comment, and it's probably good to note, as I'm sure you've seen, that the motion and as it's represented from our last item here on the settlements, talks about potential modification by the auditor's judgment, so the treasurer's comment about what that definitive language looks like or how they may advise in that document what it looks like. I'll leave for their expertise and for the treasurer to bring back
Are you
to the
talking
board.
about the current item number 4 or
No,
number
I'm not.
3?
We're
The
back.
previous.
Okay.
As Marcy was referencing, I was responding to her.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. You good with that?
Well, I'm a little confused. I'm easily
Yeah, I think
confused, so.
I'm a tish confused, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
What, can you maybe just high level, Cliff's Notes?
Yes, well, I mean,
2009-04 is what exactly? This
So-
is something that's not in here currently, correct?
correct.
Okay,
It's-
so if you
it
could
was
brief
in
me
our
quickly.
packet for the workshop on the 9th. And so
Okay.
it would be there.
And
What
it's
that
on
is,
file.
that is a resolution that allows the administrator to spend up to $10,000 without board action on a contract.
Okay,
It has no limits to the number of contracts that can be signed in a day, in a year, or at any time.
okay,
It also allows the administrator and the president together to sign contracts up to, not include, over $30,000.
Okay.
Again, that's an unlimited amount of money that can be spent at such time. So we're going to talk in the next item here about administrators' use of budget authority. And so this is something that I felt that when you take a look at the authority that the administrator has to spend money without board authority, he has not only that, but he has a credit card, which has $15,000 cap on it every month. So that's 180 grand a year.
okay,
So I don't feel that the administrator is really corralled by his authority to spend money. He has that ability. And I am, again, this is a resolution, when it was written, as I remember, and voted on, it was kind of an emergency situation. And over the years, it's kind of migrated a little bit to not necessarily emergency work. And so I think it's important that, as I did with the last meeting, I asked to have the chief financial officer be the treasurer here and not the administrator. That the board of managers, I mean, we are managers, we're not directors. That's the title, manager, be actively participating in this. And so this resolution was included in the packet with the discussion for the next item. And I said, as I said, when you start sitting it down, there's a lot of discretion in spending here, and maybe, and to me, a little too much. So that's what this was about. And we could, we haven't a motion on the table yet, I mean, on the table for this item. So I will make the motion to repeal. I believe that's the correct word, Mr. Lawyer, that I want you to repeal number 2009-04 resolution, which, just a moment, I'll read the proper language for it as soon as I find my place again. Yes, here it is. Resolution authorizing district administrator to enter into certain contracts. That's what this does. So under the current rules, he can enter into those contracts, and you could take a large amounts of money can be spent if you piece out the contracts into sections. So it's a really very, very loose rule, and that's why I wanted it repealed. And I think we need to take a look at the financial. We're going to look at the bylaws eventually. This is one of the bylaws resolutions here. So I'll move that be repealed. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. I think we've had most of the discussion about it. And if you don't feel comfortable about acting on it today, there's a motion that takes care of that too.
And that's a motion to table.
Yes, it is.
I would move we table this.
Table is not debatable. We have a, so all in favor of tabling, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
No, I don't want to table it.
No, I don't think you need to table it. It seems pretty clear. It's just a transparency piece. And I think just even coming out of the meeting that we had yesterday, the special meeting regarding the finances, I think the treasurer should take an active role in monitoring all that. And we kind of got walked through the process of what that looks like. So, I mean, I think checks and balances makes sense to me. It's just another layer of transparency, and it just keeps the managers, it really just prompts us to pay better attention. I mean, it's hard when we're spending taxpayer dollars because it's taxpayer dollars. And I think there is a layer of transparency that needs to exist.
So I'm not opposed to the discussing this and acting on it, Mr. Chair. I am just uncomfortable that this is being done without two other members in the room and without the paper in front of me.
Ah, yes, I did bring mine from the workshop. That's how I know it.
Right.
It is. And I didn't bring extra copies for it. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. I just brought my workshop packet.
Yeah, well,
with me.
even if you had copies for all of this, it wasn't on the agenda. It wasn't anything I was prepared to take action on. And
Oh, it's on the agenda. It was added to the agenda and approved, so it's on the agenda.
it
but
was
any-
not on the previously
Well, that's
the noticed agenda, and we are missing two other members, two other managers right now. So
Yes, we still have a motion on the floor, though.
correct.
It has to be voted on. So all those in favor of repeal signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And all those against signify by saying nay.
Nay.
All right, 2-1.
Can I make a comment really quickly, Mr. Chair? Like,
Yes.
this is the tricky part about the parliamentary process, right? Like, when you have the ability to just add items on the agenda, I mean, I wasn't here in January 9th, so I don't
That's
even
correct.
have a packet. I could go look online. I mean, I understand the concept. That's why I gave a yay vote, because I understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. But I mean, again, this is the tricky part
Well-
about the parliamentary process when you, I
Yes.
mean, maybe moving forward, again, I'm not a bylaw expert. I'm a novice parliamentary expert, but maybe there needs to be a clear process for how we put things on the agenda, like go through a workshop or something. I mean, again, I'm new here, so if I'm misunderstanding, I'm fine with being told that, but I mean, I get what you're saying. I don't want you to feel like something was just rammed down your throat. I don't want you to feel that way. But
Well, this was a bylaw change.
This is a bylaw change, and I spoke to the president during the meeting last time. I asked
Okay.
him what we were going to do about this, and
Okay.
he said, take care of that yourself.
okay,
So I'm
mission accomplished. I
I
get it.
think I think this is we should move forward. We're going to look at the bylaws some more.
Don't we
But,
need don't we need some kind of public notice on bylaw changes?
You don't need any more public notice than what you're going to do for the next one here.
Manager Waller? Chair
Yes.
Waller? If I could, just to be clear, the resolution itself is not a bylaw. The agenda item from the previous meeting did have some association with the resolution, but this is not a bylaw change that you're undertaking with the motion and the voting that just occurred. That's my comment, and then I do have a question for steps to move forward, if I could.
Yes.
Louis, if you could assist, because the district's credit card was mentioned, I'm wondering if that action that just took place curtails its use immediately, and that, because I would presume that presenting a credit card is entering into a contract, and we've eliminated that administrator's ability. So I just want to make sure that we should pull those from staff, if you will, or inactivate them for use.
Mr. Chair, in response to Mr. Tomchik's question, it's hard for me because I don't have the language of Resolution 2009 in front of me. So I would look to that language in order to determine whether credit cards are included.
Louis, here is the language, and maybe we'll give you a minute here to contemplate what it specifically states. Manager Waller, as Louis is looking at, I'll just note that I'm not sure of you made notice of the emergency efforts and the need for the resolution back in the time. I obviously wasn't participating in that and such, and I'm not sure of what that association with the district's credit card was, and that's my reason for seeking the clarification.
Mr. Chair, managers, I'm looking at the first paragraph of the resolving clause, which involves the board's delegation to the administrator the authority to enter a contract up to $10,000 for the purchase of goods and supplies or for professional and technical services consistent with the approved budget. At least on first reading, this would include credit card purchases. And so if consistent with the board's action, I would recommend that all credit cards be suspended.
Thank you. Then I think that this is an item that needs to be reviewed and looked at because there's, as I said at the workshop, I don't have any problem necessarily being able to pay bills that have to be paid. They're small items. But there needs to be some kind of cap on what's done and what isn't done. And this resolution includes up to $30,000, whereas maybe $10,000 wouldn't be so unreasonable. But the credit card cap is $15,000 a month, $15,000 a month. That's above the $10,000 that the administrator would have. And so I think that we can move forward and look at this item and give us a point to begin. With that, we'll move.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Again, I don't have this in front of me. So is this the credit card? Is this the $10,000? Is this the $30,000? And if we've just eliminated all three of those factors, we have hamstrung this organization from doing any work.
I don't think that you've hamstrung the organization from doing any work. It does include both the $10,000 and $30,000. It's an unfortunate agreement or resolution that it includes both of those. And it should be reviewed and taken a look at. And so, but that item is, we're finished with it now and we'll move on.
So we're hamstrung. So Nick we can't enter any, so how are we going to enter in contracts? They need to come to me? They need to make a decision at this board table every time they need something? How are you going to manage this?
Board of Managers, that remains to be seen. I would say that, yes, all matters, financial matters would have to come to the board regardless of amount. The district doesn't hold quote unquote petty cash. We do have a few routine items that are placed on the credit card for what's the term?
That's what we're
electronic payment and such. So we will have to call those entities so that those do not occur on routine basis. They are in the check register and that sort of thing, but we'll have to pull those.
So the issue here was spending money prior to being authorized by the board. And the credit card is authorization of spending money prior to being authorized by the board. The money is spent, it's out the door, it's done, and then the bill from the credit card company comes to the board and spent that way. That's what the issue was. And that's why you went to this next resolution here, which has to do with allowing delegating the administrator the authority to sign checks and disbursements for certain categories of operational and administrative expenditures with the board approved budget. So when we get on to this and find out what happens with it, maybe they won't be hamstrung. Anyways.
Mr. Manager, or Mr. Chair, I have a question. So I understand the inclusion of credit cards in this policy. It's a policy, correct? It's not a bylaw, it's a policy. But what we just dialogued is restricting the amount per purchase on those cards, correct? So, or is it the total?
We did it all.
According to Mr. Smith, the contract with the credit card with a $15,000 monthly cap is a contract that the administrator engages in. And therefore, that contract is no longer available because he can't engage into contracts that are in at all that are with this authority
Or any individual purchase.
or individual purchase. He
So
has to come to the board and receive the money and authorize the purchase that way.
So you're inferring, Mr. Attorney, that the credit card itself is a contract. Therefore, it is outside of the $10,000 amount, and it is just, we've just voided that contract. I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. Is that correct? Okay,
Chair,
it's,
I
Manager
don't think we
Robertson,
voted.
certainly entering into a credit card arrangement is a contract with
I
a Visa
understand.
or
Yep,
whoever.
I understand.
But secondly, I was saying that under the paragraph 1 of the resolution, the authority of the administrator to engage in contracts to purchase goods or supplies up to $10,000 was just repealed. And each individual purchase on a credit card is a contract for purchase of goods or supplies.
That's a very technical way of referring to a credit card. I think I might start using those technicalities with my children for, encouraging them not to use cards as they're, entering into a contract every time they use it. I think there's a way to accomplish what it is that you're looking for and what you're looking for. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, shred all the credit cards. Like, that's silly. I understand what you're trying to accomplish, and I understand what you're saying. I don't know if right now in this moment is the time to vet that, because I have a feeling that could be a very prolonged conversation. We have a similar policy to this at City Hall, but it includes credit card purchases. We don't refer to our credit card as a contract. Maybe the language in our policy as it relates to the city manager's ability to spend money is different, where the credit card isn't referred to as a contractual obligation. But I think there is a way to accomplish what it is you want and what you want that may include just a little finesse of the language. I don't know what the proper forum is to do that, if that's right now or if that's in a workshop per se. But, I understand what everyone's comments are, and I understand where everyone's coming from. So do you want me to try to navigate this now, or do you want to, because if you're saying that canceling the credit cards has to happen now, then since we're just adding stuff to the agenda and making motions, I would just make a motion that we don't suspend the credit cards until this policy is more clearly defined. No one's trying to take anyone out at the knees or, cap one's ability to do something or not do something. So, I'm happy to do that just so that we can give it the appropriate time. I get what you're saying, but I also understand what Manager Waller is saying as well. So is that something that you want me to do?
Mr. Chair, Manager Robertson, I think that would be in order if your goal is to restore the credit card authority.
I would make a motion that we restore the credit card authority only.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I don't think anyone's trying to, again, not allow, because the credit card is in the financials, correct? Or is it just come through as a payment, or do you get the itemized statement?
The district has all the receipts for the contracts that we enter into, and we're invoiced, and then they're distributed according to the various funds of what the purpose of the expenditure was. Did I answer the question?
You did, and I think maybe I agree, let's restore the credit cards, but maybe could we also ask staff to include something in each workshop packet to include just a list of charges that were made on the card, just so instead of them being divvied up into, 10, 30, 65, all the things, is there just one sheet in here that says, here's what was charged on the card?
No. Go ahead.
Manager Waller, Manager Robertson, within the check register, there will be a payment on the credit card. Obviously, that's the lump sum amount.
I understand.
The treasurer will see the accounts payable, which indicates where those would be pulled out, and then look to consider any invoices that they have an interest in. Is that
Yes,
addressed?
yes and no. I'm just asking if, let's restore your card, okay? But can we just put in itemized, let's just say you have a Capital One Visa. I don't know what card you use here, or your Amex, whatever it is. I'm not saying carbon copy the statement, but just put it on here. Say, here's what we use the credit card for in this time period. List whatever it is, whatever department it is, and the amount. I mean, just again, I think part of the challenge is there's some sort of historical inference that there's been shenanigans. I don't know what it is or what it isn't, or I don't know and I don't care. To be honest, I want to give you the tools you need. I want to give you the tools you need, and I definitely don't want to cripple staff. So I will second Mr. Waller's motion that we restore the card and just ask that we put an item in the agenda that lists what the charges were on the card for whatever period the agendas are for.
The credit card contract is a contract, but it never appears like MasterCard or Visa on the check register. I think you break it down into each department, of which you'd say if you paid Excel Energy off the credit card, that's where you get Excel Energy off of it. So it's not, like I said, the credit card's been a handy deal. My city at home, they don't have it, for example. It's an unusual thing, I guess. A couple cities I've talked to, administrators don't have a credit card. But we do here, and I don't have, but that's not the purpose of really what I was getting at, is with this resolution authorizes contracts other than the credit card and have been used. And so I think that's a need to have that more discussion come to the board. So I would second that motion, or we have the motion. All in favor? We have
Wait.
more discussion to it, or?
Wait, what exactly is on the table? Because there
Yeah,
was
what
a
is
motion
that?
on the table that
The
was
motion on
seconded
the
with
table is to
discussion.
restore the credit card authority. Is that adequate enough?
Or would the adequate motion be to remove the credit card language from the contractual obligations as stated in the policy?
Well, the policy is repealed, and yeah,
I don't
I see
know.
what you're getting at. Yeah,
Yeah.
remove it from the policy.
Mr. Chair,
Recommendations, Mr. Smith.
my recommendation would be the straightforward motion to restore the credit card use authority as previously authorized, given that you've just repealed the other resolution.
Yes. So I'll move to restore the credit card authority. And
We've done that. That's
Yes,
what's on the
that's
table
what's
right
on
now.
It's on the table.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
what's on the table
so
now.
we have a second for that.
Well, I did second that
Yes.
motion.
Yeah.
And now, Nick, we're in the discussion still.
Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
Manager Waller, Board of Managers, just for clarity and noting Manager Robertson's request or inclusion on the workshop packets, perhaps you'd like to ensure that's a part of the motion or included there for clarity in the record.
And I would like to ask, to be clear, not having the resolution in front of me, at this point, our past action was to take the authority to enter into a contract of the administrator for less than 10, and by the board chair for less than 30,000
With the administrator. Yeah.
with the administrator. So that is gone.
That's gone. But the contract for the credit card, which is, I believe, currently at 15,000, isn't it, a month?
Yes.
Yes, would be restored to the administrator. That's $180,000 a year discretionary spending he has to use without coming to the board for direct authority. It's then presented at the end of the month, and generally what has been done, as I understand it in the past, is those costs that come on the credit card bill are then itemized out to the particular accounts they were charged to improperly. And we see it as if it's a XL Energy payment, we see it as XL Energy, on the check register. So that's where that is at the moment. Is everyone clear?
Yes, I believe so. With the inclusion per the administrator that we add the language that a brief statement of credit card use be added into the financial packets.
Yes. So you have an understanding of how a trail to see how the money flows.
There you go, because it may not,
Yeah.
that discretionary spending may just be you
Yeah,
know,
it's-
utilities or things of that nature that are common expenses.
So with the end of discussion, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. 3-0. This moves us on to the next item of on the items for action, which would be the amendment to the bylaws. And in this case, it's resolution number 2023-2, amending the bylaws to delegate certain signing and disbursement authority to the district administrator.
Man,
I would move to table this.
Manager Waller?
Yes.
If I might, Board of Managers, this is a bylaw change, probably first and foremost, and their bylaws do require a 4/5 vote, and you don't have sufficient
We don't have
managers
sufficient people here to do this.
to proceed with it.
Correct. So for that purpose, I think that's an explanation for tabling it.
Yeah, I'll second
A
Manager
table is
Waller's
not
motion to
debatable. All in
second.
favor?
Aye.
The next item is, Madam Treasurer,
I move approval of the expense report for $43,977.37.
I'll second that motion.
all in favor? Any discussion to it? Anybody have any questions about them items? Nope, no questions?
Nope. I've reviewed those with Teresa and Nick and Manager Waller, and following what he has done previously in reviewing invoices.
Okay. In that case, all in favor of approving the check register? Signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Then let's move on to that concludes items for action. So it brings us to items for discussion. Engineer Chris, you have some presentation today or update or such, or?
Yes, Manager Waller, Board of Managers, as Patrick is bringing this presentation up, just as a matter of reference, presentation I'm going to give now was something I was intending to provide at the MOD annual meeting back in November, and unfortunately I got sick and I was not able to present, so now I'm finally getting my chance to have somebody have an audience to what I was planning to do here. So this presentation is in regard to wetland regulations that affect how drainage authorities manage their public drainage systems. And this is intended to be a little bit of a primer on what kind of wetland regulations affect public drainage system management and how drainage authorities have made decisions with regard to managing the systems to be able to navigate within these wetland regulations while be able to effectively and efficiently spend the dollars of the benefiting landowners and or the constituents they represent. So you can go to the next slide, Patrick. One of the main themes you'll see throughout this presentation is that navigating this wetland regulation is very challenging. Multiple entities are involved, multiple types of legislation, rules, statutes involve this process, and you'll see here as I go forward, and it's probably no surprise to any of you that there's a lot of complexity to it. I'm not going to get into the details a whole lot on any of these, but just give you a little flavor of what we're dealing with. The next slide. I'll just note that we do have a lot of the information regarding where the intersect of the wetland regulations are with public drainage within the Minnesota Public Drainage Manual. It is online, available on Balzer's website. That's something that we worked with Balzer to develop back in 2016. If you ever have any interest in diving in deeper on any of this topic, certainly feel free to, I encourage you to go there to the Balzer website, and there's more than enough information there to read for a long time. Next slide. Just note that there are multiple levels of regulations affecting this work, including federal regulation and state regulation. I'm just going to go briefly with each one of these. Next. With the federal regulation, this is actually the easy part, believe it or not. The first thing I'll talk about is the Clean Water Act, now 50 years old, established back in '72. Regulates all sorts of different activities, on a project, from the MPDS permit that we have to get on a project to addressing fill in the waters of the United States. And I'm not going to get into that waters of the United States definition. That could be a whole nother presentation altogether there. Just important to note that it is something that is administered by the Corps of Engineers and in some cases would require a permit. Next slide. Just note that there is a permit, a regional general permit that is out there already that authorizes the discharge of dredge or fill for ditch maintenance. And this is the reason why you haven't seen us become closely engaged with the Corps of Engineers or the federal permitting on our projects, because most of the work we do in the Watershed District with regard to ditches is in the realm of ditch maintenance. And so this fits under this permit that already exists, and there's no need to obtain additional permits. I'll note one difference here in a few slides down the road here, where we have had become engaged, because the maintenance under this permit, the definition isn't necessarily the same definition that repair is under 103E and other state statutes. Next slide. And this gets into the project that we had about 10 years ago, Anoka Washington Judicial Ditch 4. This is a project that where we realigned the ditch in order to be able to restore the function of the drainage system, while at the same time creating this wetland banking project we know as Brown's Preserve. And that project did traverse through what was a public water. We were able to get it delisted, and through a wildlife management area, which was later transferred over to the Rice Creek Watershed District. So again, our solution to this problem was restoring that wetland on the site and realigning the ditch. We were able to accomplish a lot with that project in the way of providing that outlet for landowners and be able to have a source of wetland credits in the future for the district for other operations. So next slide. The issue we ran into here was that definition of repair and maintenance at the state and the federal level. We did have to realign that ditch through a number of type 1 wetlands. Under the State Wetland Conservation Act, that realignment falls under the definition of repair. And because of that, and what I'll talk about in a little bit about what type 1 wetlands, there wouldn't be a requirement to mitigate those impacts, those type 1 wetlands, as part of our realignment. However, because we were also needing to work with the, under the Federal Clean Water Act, in discussions with the Corps of Engineers, they notified us that the federal definition does not include realignment, and so the district was required to mitigate for those impacts that we were doing to create a wetland bank.
Are we, so is this the ditches up here? This is the one we just recently repaired?
He's talking about drainage ditches in general here,
Right, but
in this
judicial ditch
specific,
4 is-
ditch number 4 would be up here.
Yeah,
And it's Brown's Preserve is actually, we're talking about this portion right here. You see this goes over and up.
To the 2 counties.
And
Okay.
so that, I don't know if you have a map or not.
I do have a map. I'm just watching the slides. I'm paying attention. Don't
Sure.
worry.
Well, I was going to tell you
Right.
where it is. It's on the county borderline between Anoka and Washington,
Yeah.
up at Forest Lake, just below Clear Lake.
I figured since the address was 145th that it was up in that area.
It's
And we
190th
didn't we
Street,
just
actually.
clean that out or straighten it, or we did some major?
We haven't done anything major there recently, but we do continue to maintain that. There's routine maintenance and inspection that occurs in there
Okay.
over the last 10 years after we've done that realignment. So yeah, we have been in there quite regularly.
Okay.
But yeah, this is that location just to the east of the 35W 35E split. You can see it right off the freeway there to the east.
Pardon me, Chris, but just to add a little bit more there's really two wetland complexes that wetland banking complexes the district is responsible for. The one you're referring to as Brownies Preserve, is that the proper name? Browns Preserve. And then there's the Wall Brothers that is contiguous to it, but just south of it. So we have quite a chunk of property in there. I reckon must be 120, maybe more acres, somewhere in there.
Yeah, correct. The district owns Browns Preserve. The district doesn't own the land for Walls Preserve, but they do manage it.
Do all the maintenance on the preserve.
And this is by Wargo Nature Center?
No, that's Wargo Nature Center is
Okay.
It's been a while since we had newer members on the board, but I used to give them a tour over in Washington County in my old dirty truck.
Yep,
but I generally don't take ladies in that old dirty truck.
Okay.
But maybe maybe we should have a tour sometime of the district, rent a bus and have that.
Sure, now that we all have shirts, we can do that.
Yes, you all have a uniform. You can be on the same softball team or something.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Sorry.
No problem. And again, the takeaway from this project was that, again, we did have to actually utilize some of those credits that we had just banked then in order to do the realignment of the ditch. And again, the takeaway is that those rules aren't going to always be in alignment with each other, the Clean Water Act and the Wetland Conservation Act. And so it's one of those entanglements that creates challenges as we work on these projects. Next slide, Patrick. Another one I won't really get into much is the Swamp Buster Act, the part of the Food Security Act. And we really don't get into this because it isn't something that's a regulation impacting our work, but it is something that could potentially impact the adjacent landowner or grower in their ability to be able to get federal funding and subsidy from the government, from the USDA. And again, I won't get into that because it really is mostly impacting improvement projects where you're creating additional drainage that wasn't there already. You can go through 2 more slides there, Patrick. So that's the federal regulations. Again, that's a little more on the simple side. We don't engage with them much, but now I'll get into the Wetland Conservation Act. And again, these are items that we do become engaged in a lot more. And again, you as a board, you are a local government unit that administers the Wetland Conservation Act. I won't get into a lot of detail of that role. One thing I'll note on this slide, though, is that on state-owned lands, the DNR does become the LGU for work that is done on those state properties. And I do have another slide coming up here where that comes into a factor where you might be having to engage with an LGU that is not the Drainage Authority, that may not have an understanding as well of how these projects move forward. One thing I'll note is that there are a couple different types of impacts that can occur with a drainage project related to the Wetland Conservation Act. That includes either placement of fill or the drainage of wetland, and we do encounter both of those at times in our work here. Next slide. Important to note that under the Wetland Conservation Act, most of the work that we do for maintenance is considered no loss. Even if there is a lowering of the water next to a wetland, under the Wetland Conservation Act, this is considered no loss if you're working in wetlands that have existed less than 25 years. And that has to do with a lot of the minor maintenance activities we do. If you're creating in a wet area simply because a beaver dam is there, that's, again, a no loss type of action. Similarly, if we are working in type 1 or 2 wetlands, which are, the reed canary grass type of wetlands, or 6, 7, and 8 wetlands, which are more the brushy type wetlands, that kind of work is exempt. It's a no loss under the Wetland Conservation Act. We don't have to worry about mitigating impacts. Where we have had to mitigate impacts in previous projects is to type 3, 4, or 5 wetlands. Those are the wetlands that almost permanently have a pool of water on them. And those specifically those wetlands that have existed more than 25 years. In those circumstances, we have had on occasion had to mitigate for those impacts. In addition to that, there are the potential to impact wetland mitigation or banking areas, and we've also dealt with this a few times, particularly on No County Ditch 5362, where there were wetland banking projects that occurred right up to the edge of the ditch. We did have to get some do some mitigation because we were placing spoil material on the bank of the ditch, which also was that banking area, which unfortunately occurred prior to the project. There are lots of other exemptions out there for the Wetland Conservation Act. I won't detail all of them, but it is a fairly lengthy rule, and we do have to do a lot of research at times to be able to document that we have not created a impact or wetland loss on the landscape. Next slide. One project here I'll talk about for a case study is in Lac-Qui-Parle County, a project we worked on called County Ditch 24. We did a ditch clean out on this property. This is one of those circumstances where the DNR owned property here and was the LGU. We were working back and forth with them on obtaining permission to work through here, as it was their property, and it had been 25 years since the last clean out. And I guess when I said permission, that's probably not the proper term, but we needed to make sure that they felt like there was no impact being the LGU here. So they requested that we submit a no loss application, which we did. We got the no loss application back from the DNR, and they had placed a condition on the application that the spoils be removed from the site, which is something that's problematic when we're doing these drainage system repairs, because if you're trying to haul off spoils, you can often do more damage in trying to haul those spoils off with your trucking equipment that you would have out there than if you place the spoil right on the bank edge. And that placement of spoil on the bank edge is an exempt activity under the Wetland Conservation Act. So we did have to go back to the DNR and explain to them this issue, and they thankfully understood after we explained the issue we had with it and how problematic that was, and they modified that no loss application so that we could continue the work. Next slide. Another one in Lac-Qui-Parle County. This was County Ditch 4, Branch 3. This happened to be a tile improvement that we worked on. This was a tile that actually went through a wetland that was certified by the USDA as prior converted. However, because the USDA calls it prior converted, that doesn't mean that it's exempt under the Wetland Conservation Act. And so working with the DNR as they complete their advisory review, we needed to complete a no loss on this one. And what we ended up coming up with under the Wetland Conservation Act is this exemption that at the time I wasn't even aware of, that exempted drainage of type 1 wetland areas and areas that were assessed for drainage benefits from 1972 to 1992. I have no idea why that exemption exists in the Wetland Conservation Act, but it was there, and that was what we were able to use for the exemption of that work be able to complete that project. So that was one example where it took a little bit of diving into the rule in order to be able to find that exemption that would be most appropriate and clearest demonstration of the lack of a loss of wetlands that would be requiring mitigation. So next slide. Talk a little bit about how we go about addressing non-exempt wetland impacts. So sometimes we go through the process and we realize there are going to be wetland impacts potentially doing the repair work that might be creating non-exempt wetland losses. And so what we generally do is first try to determine what that potential for impact might be. And one of the things that Rice Creek has made a practice of is reestablishing records on the drainage system. That's one of the most important items is be able to know where that original channel bottom was. That's the first step, and be able to understand what the potential for impact will be when you do the ditch maintenance. We also complete wetland delineations at times, surveying, modeling at times. That's often able to narrow up that area of potential impact, and I'll show one example we had in Rice Creek of that. The other approach that we may have is avoidance. There are times where we might modify the repair depth, or do a realignment, or even potentially abandon a portion of the drainage system in order to do that avoidance, which may not, which may cost more in mitigation than what the value is provided to the landowner. Next slide. Example we have, another one in Rice Creek here is Judicial Ditch 2, Branch 2. This is over in Hugo. This is off the east side of, southeast side of Rice Lake. Manager Waller is very familiar with this area, of course. On the south side of County Road 8, we needed to examine the potential for wetland impact as we were doing the clean out of that portion of ditch. Our initial examination that we do usually starts with using this method called the Van Schilfgaard equation, which determines how much draw, or what's also referred to as scope and effect, that the ditch may have in being able to drain the water laterally through the soil. Using that equation, we determined that the repair could potentially drain up to 0.9 acres based on that methodology. But we had also previous experience in other drainage system work that we had completed, that equation tends to overestimate the effects of drainage in that lateral, in that open channel, particularly in the circumstances we deal with frequently in Rice Creek with some of these shallow wetland areas and peaty ground areas. Next slide. So what we did is we did a little more examination here, and we compared the elevation of the water levels we had in the adjacent wetland to what the water levels on the bottom of the ditch. And we also looked at where hydrology was coming from, where the water is coming in to hydrate the soil in that wetland. And we determined that really it was not possible that the ditch has a significant effect on the lateral drainage of water through the system, because because the water level in the ditch as it was already well below the level in that wetland. So based on that information, we were able to make a no-loss application. In this case, we had to make that to the city of Hugo, who was the LGU within the city, and we were able to successfully then complete the work without having to do any wetland mitigation in this area. Again, the lesson here is, and we've done this again throughout the Watershed District on many of our projects, is that we do need to use those multiple tools, including sometimes doing modeling of the water levels following repair in order to determine what that impact might be out there and try to narrow that scope up. Next slide.
And this is the project we use the equipment on a pontoon to clean out the wetland?
Board of Managers, yes, this is the general area where that work took place with the floating backhoe, I guess you'd call it. Yeah.
Yes, correct. Yep, that was a little further down on this branch here, but yep, same project.
All right.
Another effort that was completed in Wright County, it's County Ditch 38. In this case, we had a type 3 wetland. There was a public drainage system tile that went through the wetland, is non-functioning. And as such, the water level in that wetland had been creeping up over a long period of time. There was a desire to have a functioning outlet. We understood, though, that we wouldn't be able to go back more than 25 years without having significant wetland impact mitigation that would be required. And the county identified that from a cost-benefit standpoint, they couldn't put that cost of mitigating for those wetlands back on the benefiting landowners in order to be able to restore the tile all the way through the wetland. But what we did instead was take a look back at aerial photos from 25 years prior and determine what was the condition at that point, where we wouldn't, the wetland, where the wetland had grown in that 25-year period, that area would be exempt or considered to be exempt on that wetland for that activity. And so then looking at those photos, we were able to determine what that elevation was, and we set an outlet elevation for the tile where we would be able to successfully draw down that wetland to that 25-year period. And that way we'd be able to provide a better outlet for the landowners, but yet not have to incur any of those very costly mitigation costs that again would be going right back onto those benefiting landowners. Next slide. Another project, this is in Kanabec County, over towards Mora, and this is a ditch repair that was completed. Majority of the ditch, which I believe is about 7 miles long, it had type 1, type 2 wetlands along the drainage system. Those are all exempt or considered no loss under the Wetland Conservation Act for that repair. However, we did have one branch where the upper portion of the branch, we did have type 3 wetland that intersected the drainage system. And at this location, that wetland, the water was perched because of a culvert that was under the county road. That culvert had been there for over 25 years in that way, so that if wetland existed for over 25 years. So we couldn't find any sort of apparent exemption for the wetland loss that would potentially occur by lowering the county road. So in this case, the county board elected to leave that culvert in place, noting a couple of different things. One is that even if they were able to lower that culvert, they wouldn't be able to make an effective change to the land use in that area to provide a sufficient benefit to the landowners in order to justify, again, that cost that it would take in order to do that wetland mitigation there, which again would go back to those benefiting landowners. So from a cost-benefit standpoint, they decided we'll leave that culvert there for right now. We did clean the ditch through there, which allowed an efficiency of the outlet and be able to provide value to the lands coming in there. And it still provided opportunity if the county wanted to move forward with it later, or the economics of the issue changed, that they could pursue a culvert modification and then review the potential for wetland impacts again at that point. But again, the point here is that they had to evaluate multiple alternatives here. It wasn't a clear-cut decision, again, because they have to weigh the cost versus the benefit. Next slide. Another project, this is up in St. Louis County. Might be hard for some folks to imagine how there could be a lot of drainage ditches up in that area of the state where you're dominated by woods and wetlands. But in this particular location, there are actually there's a system that had 66 miles of open ditch. It was laid out in this kind of weird gridded pattern you see on the screen here. It served areas that were, I guess, a pasture and hayland. And then a lot of the areas, especially in the upper ends of the system, were state lands. They're open water wetlands, and a lot of these were subject then to the Wetland Conservation Act. And one of the first steps that the Drainage Authority did as it started evaluating a repair request was to complete a proceeding to reestablish the records, and at the same time they partially abandoned over half of this drainage system. And what we did was look at which areas of the drainage system really provide no benefit to the land use or the potential land use that's in those areas. And again, most of those areas were state land anyway. And after completing that work, we again reduced that scope of the project down to only, or that ditch down to only 31 miles. None of those 31 miles has type 3 wetlands on it. So we've effectively been able to avoid having to do any wetland mitigation impacts on the project by completing repairs along that part of the drainage system. Again, here, important to eliminate some of those non-necessary points, not only for be able to complete, evaluating repairs, but also just be able to reduce long-term maintenance and management of the drainage system. And Rice Creek has done something like this in the past. There's a couple of tile systems, a Nook County Ditch 55 and Nook County Ditch 72, where the Board of Managers did abandon, almost, I think over half of the tile that was on those drainage systems due to the fact those tiles were on lands that were not providing a public benefit. The tiles were, I guess, small in size. They were almost like pattern tiling on those properties. And the district was able to then eliminate the need to manage those part of the drainage systems that did not provide that public benefit.
And Chris, on this one, St. Louis County Board was acting as the drainage authority.
That's correct. Yep. Next slide. And finally, I'll mention Browns Preserve. I mentioned that before in conjunction with the JD4 project. Important that there are options for dealing with these wetland impacts that might not necessarily cause as large of a cost to the benefiting landowners or to the landowners of the watershed district. And one of the ways that we did this for Rice Creek was to create this Browns Preserve wetland bank, where we were able to create almost 61 acres of credit for the Rice Creek watershed district. Again, that was done in partnership with another adjacent landowner who was also able to get wetland credits out of his own property, in addition to that 61 acres. So far, Rice Creek has utilized 20.4 acres of that wetland bank credit for drainage system efforts. Again, one big portion of that was that JD4 project to be able to do that realignment. But I believe we've had probably at least 4 or 5 other efforts that the district has done on the public drainage systems where we've been able to utilize those credits. And again, those credits are provided specifically for use on district projects. And we do anticipate, again, utilizing those in the future on upcoming efforts the district does.
So, Chris, that means my rough math, around approximately 40 credits are still available?
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, the last thing I'll talk about is public waters. Again, important to note the distinction between the Wetland Conservation Act and public waters. Public waters are administered by the DNR, and there are 2 different types of those public waters. The open water type that are the we refer to as wetlands or basins, and then there's also the flowing water ones, which are the streams, the water courses they refer to them. When we're looking at drainage system repairs on the public water courses, those are generally exempt. And one example of that is when we did JD3. The main trunk of JD3 is also called Clearwater Creek and is a DNR public water course. Doing the clean out of the ditch did not require any permission or permitting or any other regulatory engagement with the DNR for that work. If we were working in a public water basin, we also aren't required to have a permit if we aren't affecting the runout. And an example of that would be the work we completed on JD2 branches 1 and 2 in Rice Lake, where we had the floating pontoon excavator out there. That was one example where the DNR actually did want us to obtain permission from them, but then later they redacted that, noting that that was not required for that type of action, which was very important. And now we've had continued discussions with the DNR, and each time they note that, yeah, we now have a good understanding of where that line is drawn between requiring the permission or permit for work in the public water and where not to. So the areas where the repairs can affect the runout of that public water, the outlet of the public water, they do trigger more significant DNR regulatory engagement, and that can in some cases come in the way of permission, could come in the way of permitting, or other matters. Next slide. Going back to this Kanabec County project again, up by Mora. And that project, that ditch that we cleaned out was considered a public water course, and because of that, we didn't have to engage the DNR on that work. However, that ditch flowing from north to south went down to the Isani County line. At the Isani County line, the ditch stopped being a public drainage system and became a DNR public water course only. And because of that, work that the Drainage Authority needed to do in order to be able to provide relief to the outlet needed to come with obtaining a permit from the DNR. And in this case, there were about 7 beaver dams and some cattail bog that needed to be cleaned out in order to accomplish that. And fortunately, the DNR understood the situation. We were able to complete that permitting with them, with relatively little effort beyond completing the permit. Next slide. Another case study right here in the Watershed District. This is Anoka County Ditch 5362. This is just south of the district office, close to where the Walmart was built. I guess that'd probably be about maybe 6-7 years ago now. This location, the ditch flowed through a public water wetland, again administered by the DNR. Doing a traditional repair through here would have drained this public water. And because of that, we sought an alternative solution, and what we did was realign the ditch around the public water and complete that in conjunction with that repair through that area. It was great, it was effective. We were able to provide an outlet now to those landowners near that Ball Road area and around where the Walmart and some of those other new commercial facilities were constructed. However, one issue that came out of this was in obtaining a permit from the DNR to be able to realign that water around the public water. And we had to do that because we were cutting off a source of hydrology into that wetland. They placed a permit condition that the district complete a threatened and endangered species survey of the area. And they did this because they had the understanding that in this area, there wasn't a good understanding of where there were threatened and endangered species, and there had been a noting in some areas of observances of these species that weren't listed on the inventory. So we were required to complete that, and go to the next slide here. Well, actually, I'll talk about that in one more slide after this here. One more project here, Lackaparle County, another county ditch project. We're going through a public water here. This is just upstream of that other area that we talked about earlier where we had to engage the DNR as the LGU. And in this area, we had a landowner request for cleaning the ditch out. We went back and forth with the DNR for probably about a 4-year period. And this issue was argued over because the DNR was convinced that the repair that we were proposing would effectively drain this public water that was on the landscape. We disagreed, feeling that the effects would be relatively minor, and that this was a responsibility of the Drainage Authority. And so going back and forth in multiple meetings, we finally had some additional discussion with some of the adjacent landowners around the public water, and noting the grades that were upstream of the public water, and noted that upstream of it, the grade came up relatively quickly. The landowners adjacent to the public water did not express concern about the water levels in there. So what we did as a compromise in this location is to complete the work on the drainage system ditch, but we stopped short of that runout. There again, and this is a decision the Drainage Authority made here. They looked at it and said, where do we weigh this benefit of the cost for these benefiting landowners and continued engagement on this? We need relief on it now. And the Drainage Authority elected to complete that work downstream of there, noting that they potentially could work on the outlet of the public water at some point in the future if it became a concern, but noting that at the time it wasn't worth again, spending the dollars for the landowners in this part of the system in order to get that last little bit. Next slide. And finally, last thing I'll talk about is threatened endangered species. I just touched on that before talking about No County Ditch 5362. We do have to become engaged in this and look at this with every repair report we complete. There is a statewide database that we look at that identifies where these threatened endangered species have been identified on the landscape within proximity of our projects. Next slide. Jumping back to that project, County Ditch 5362, when we were required to do that threatened endangered species survey on that project, we did locate 7 different rare plant species along the drainage system that were on the threatened endangered species list. It was actually quite astounding to see how prolific they were in this area of Blaine. And we looked at that. We had to map out each area, identify how close it was to the drainage system. And we did modify our plans in order to ensure that where the contractor was working was in an area that where they wouldn't be trampling over the locations where we found these rare species. One thing I'll note is that one thing we found where there was site disturbances on the landscape, that was the area where we found the greatest propagation of those rare species. And that's because a lot of these rare species need to have that disturbance in order to proliferate, especially when you have these other invasive species that choke them out. And so there was a couple areas where the district had done maintenance in the past along the drainage system. Those areas we found lots of those rare species along there. There were areas where people were mowing lawns right up the edge of the ditch. We found the rare species in those mowed areas. So that was something that we noted in there, and certainly area of interest in the future. I think that is, I guess, one quick summary here. I'll note takeaways from all this is that, again, most of the work we do as a watershed district is exempt from these wetland regulations. However, there are cases where we do get involved with this, particularly on some of our larger drainage projects, where we do have to more significantly clean out a portion of the drainage system. And that coordination is very critical going up front, making sure we cover all our bases before we start the work so that we can adequately demonstrate those exemptions that we may have and not needlessly have to mitigate for wetland loss that doesn't really occur. And the last takeaway I'll say is that we do on almost every drainage project consider alternative repairs. Not every project is going to be repaired in the same way, and there are some cases where in evaluating the best use of the dollars we have available, sometimes the benefit for doing a particular action might not outweigh the cost for doing that. So that's something we continually evaluate as we're working through these efforts. That's all I had. I can take any additional questions from the board.
Manager White.
Thank you. Your last slide about the threatened and endangered species. The Citizens Advisory Committee had a presentation about the Anoka Sand Plains and all the rare plants that are there. Is this part of Blaine? Is that considered in the Anoka Sand Plains?
Yes.
Yes. So people, when those are identified and they're going to be disturbed, there are actually plant rescuers out there that take and protect them or transplant them. You know about this?
I do. I was just going to say I'm super familiar with the endangered plant species that you're referring to, because I don't know if these all worked in conjunction with each other, but a developer on that north part of County Road 14 we were enveloped in an EAW. And so part of that EAW included extensive work, and Jason Huspeth, who I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, like literally was blown away by the amount of endangered plants. And he actually does work with sometimes even the Rotary Club and some of the other local botanical related clubs. They go out and they rescue those plants and they try to propagate them in other places. So yeah, there was a remarkable amount of endangered plant species that they weren't anticipating there, and also adjacent to Pioneer Park on the north side of County Road 14 as well. Yeah, it was the most random thing. He was like blown away by it. It was really weird.
Yeah, his presentation was fascinating, so
Yeah.
yet another item that you might want to look at sometime.
Any other comments? Staff?
Manager Waller, Board of Managers, Chris, appreciate the presentation. I just echo kind of your closure there is lots of variables, each one a unique situation, different regulating authorities and the drainage authorities duty, I guess, or to consider all those factors and come up with what's best for the public or the benefited parties. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Chris. That's a very nice presentation. I guess it's just two comments I'd make about it. One, I noted that you didn't even talk about the federal government once and the Clean Water Act, and that most of this work is exempt under that, such as putting the swales on alongside and not having to haul them out. So that's important. And second, when we're doing this work in the past, when we've done some of it, it's very important that we stick to our right-of-ways and not allow our consultants to go wandering about up some of these paths and other private property areas, because it can result in a tremendous additional costs to the projects, as our experience was. That's this just reminded me of the blackberries, that's all. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
So that brings us on to the district engineer, which happens to be you, Chris. Do you have anything you want to confess to today?
Manager Waller, Board of Managers, I don't have anything specific to note to date. I guess maybe one thing I'll mention is, we're continuing to work on the No County Dish 5362 repairs over in Circle Pines. The progress still remains fairly slow. The weather conditions mid to late January with the cold weather really kind of shut things down, and they're again attempting to get back underway on there, but it's going to take some time. Mother Nature hasn't helped that project out so far.
Thank you. Administrator update.
Yes, Board of Managers, I just share the packet that I handed out before the meeting. We will mail out one for Manager Wegman and Manager Bradley as well. Just some preparatory materials you might find supportive of your legislative efforts as a board. So, thank you.
That brings us to managers' updates. Manager Robertson.
I got nothing.
Manager Wynant.
I would just point out, having looked at this, that we have a lot of we have a lot of representatives and senators that are covering our district. I'm not able to be at the Minnesota Watershed event, but I will be in contact with a number of these for other reasons, and will certainly always speak about Rice Creek when I have opportunity to do so.
Yeah, myself, I intend to attend the February 15th, meeting for the Watershed District as a representative. And I believe the board wanted to vote yes for the bylaw changes, so that's what my vote will be. And then I was in attendance to the Washington County Conservation Consortium meeting, and Patrick, you were there. And maybe since you're the technical expert here, you give a little update as to what went on at the consortium, because it had a very large audience. Over 50 individuals attended that by Zoom or whatever it is, video.
Yes, Manager Waller. I'd have to look at the agenda to remember all items, but the one that was very important that I wanted to hear about was the MS4 permit updates. Rather interesting to hear that they're not requiring reporting for the current typical schedule until they have their updated system online. So very interesting to know, and good to know for us in our efforts in tracking all that information in our MS4 front database. I'd have to look at the agenda for the
Yeah.
other items, I'm sorry.
Well, the agenda was, that was for the day involved the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency updates and rules, the Department of Natural Resources updates and rules. And then finally, I did attend the CAC meeting here last week. I want to thank Kyle Axtell for his work of getting those projects ready, grant monies ready and done. The CAC has some new members and some old members are leaving, and so it was had in fact some of the staff members. That's very few times I've ever seen them because of this COVID deal. The meeting went along well. I don't think there was anything that was necessarily odd, though there was some question about when you have the money. Since we only we have $183,000 approximately left in that fund for grants, and there was some concern that it was going to just be lost into the general fund. But our past practice has been that when we've had applications for these stormwater grant permits that came in afterwards, and we still had money there, we and the project was a good project. We just didn't say no. We went ahead with it. So if somebody comes up at the partners meeting in April, Nick recruits more applicants, we might use that money up yet, but it's not totally just lost until the end of the year. Then it's once the year's up, if it's still there, then it's rolled into the general fund. And with that, I don't have anything else to talk about, so I entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move that motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? The permitting process that identifies